because of there needing to be greater conversation around it. And I think for purposes of facilitating conversation amongst the school committee here, it's important for me to express that although the nitty-gritty details of the budget-making process are going to be performed by the administration and by the individual schools, and appropriately so, it is a task of this committee to set budget priorities. And if we think that we need to shift some of the priorities that have existed in the past, the right forum for those conversations to happen is here in these meetings. And when it comes to something where we think there's a potential critical need for an adjustment to a budget, and I think I take some exception to the concept that the motion that Mr. Bradshaw made tonight was not well thought out, because it was, and there was a pretty fulsome discussion about what the need would be and what it would be covered at the budget subcommittee meeting. That's the time to make it is when we're discussing the budget. So I would encourage the rest of my committee members to think about, if not, essentially the question of if not now, when it comes to some of these questions. And I don't necessarily begrudge anybody for thinking that maybe the request tonight was not one that should be approved. You know, we're all going to disagree, but the notion that we shouldn't have, that it might not be the right time to consider it, I think, should be rethought. Thanks.
I'm sorry. First of all, I'm not feeling well, so I'm just going to speak out. I want to address this because the school committee, for as long as I've been on the school committee, and it's been a long time, the school committee is always setting its priorities for the budget. And it's one of the reasons why for so many years I prioritized that the school committee have goals and have things, because those goals really are the way that we communicate the priorities of the school committee to the superintendent, and he or she builds the budget based on what the school committee wants. Basically, we're the ones who say where we're going, and he figures out how we get there. And we do that through our goals, through the goals through the school committee, superintendent's goals that we improve all the time, through the evaluation process and so on. So I do believe that we have been giving the superintendent his priorities in coming forward with this budget. Now, when you get down to the nitty-gritty about how to implement those things, those are different types of conversations. But I believe that, you know, we have been talking priorities when we set our goals, and we will continue to do that again. I believe the process begins in June for next year's goals and next year's priorities for the budget, because we can't expect the superintendent or anybody, the town, municipalities or anything to, on a dime at the last budget, at the last vote, to suddenly decide on where their priorities are. The priorities started way back in September when we all set our goals. And so I think that we have set our priorities for the superintendent, and he is figuring out how we're going to get there, and this is the budget he's come forward to achieve those.
I'm going to look for a vote on this budget as presented, please. So all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Are any opposed? So the ayes have it, that budget passes. For the public, that means that the request and the budget recommendation that came here will be presented to the Joint Finance Committee on March 8th. That will be held in the auditorium, in the auditorium here at Mono High School. Right? That'll be posted, so please keep an eye out for it, because it's not a school committee meeting, it's a Joint Finance Committee meeting, so it's not our posting. I'm going to ask, I received these two requests. Do you have enough patience to wait till we do a couple of quick things? Thank you. So, Mr. Waddell, next agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, recommendation S2018-13 that the school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, supported by the policy curriculum subcommittee, approve the second reading of the dual and concurrent enrollment policy, IGBC.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Bradshaw, second by Mrs. McBride. Any discussion?
I have a couple of quick questions. First, with respect to this policy, I noticed that we've added at the beginning references to AP courses, but the rest of the policy, I don't see where it refers to anything to do with AP courses, and I was just wondering why that's included there, and whether or not that's included.
I'm going to ask Diane to take this one because she has a clear idea. Diane, sorry, Diane.
I believe that the reference to AP courses was in the first reading as well. I don't think that's new. Okay. And as I try to think back on the conversation with the high school, it is because there are so many similarities between a student taking an AP course and a current or dual enrollment course, that's why it was put in there. But I do agree with you, it doesn't come up in the rest of the policy, it's just stated at the beginning.
Any other questions, comments?
I just have a question for clarification regarding the 3.0 GPA criterion for as one of the criteria that's considered for approval for enrollment. Is it the intent that that someone who does not meet that criterion could still get approved to enroll in one of the dual enrollment courses?
Well, the intent of the policy would be to make it fair and consistent across students, so that's why they're having that in there. Although it is possible, depending on the course, the high school is trying to create some consistent criteria, and this was similar to what other high schools have put in their policies as well.
So I guess if there was someone who excelled in one particular area and didn't excel in other areas where dual or concurrent enrollment course might be appropriate in the area in which they excel, but because of their struggles in other areas, they did not meet that 3.0 GPA criterion, it is possible that the approval process might allow them to still take advantage of areas where they would be able to take advantage of concurrent dual enrollment.
We do have an appeals process listed on the policy that would address that.
Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Next, Mr. Wicker.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have a typo. It is recommendation S 2018-14. The school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, supported by a policy curriculum subcommittee, approved the first reading of the controlled substance and alcohol testing for employee CMV driver's policy.
Need a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Amos, second by Mr. Odell. Any discussion?
That's an awfully long policy for one person. I mean, did I count 6 pages?
Yeah, that's
But for one person?
It's not the number of people, it's the issue.
Could we condense it some more if you're, Andrew?
You know my feeling on shorter policies, but my understanding and belief is this is a policy that was developed by the trust, our insurer. So,
all right, they're coming.
Yes.
I think it's
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I brought this up on a subcommittee level that I think we really need to be careful. It's not a policy for one person. We're not singling anybody out. It's a policy for one position.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And also,
For a position, we only have one person.
8 position, we presently only have one person, which is why I really think, I don't think I'm being picayune, that the way the policy is written, we need to put an S at the end of that, testing for employee, testing for employees.
It says employee.
It says employee.
But it says drivers.
Driver, okay. As long as it's made clear, both in our verbiage and in writing, that it's for a position, and not a particular position.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess just for clarity's sake, what position are we referring to, and what is the impetus for the trust creating or preparing this policy?
This is the bus driver that is hired by the district, so not the drivers who drive the kids to and from school, who are employed by the bus company. We have one driver who we employ, so this is to cover that person.
Was there a particular issue that arose that led to the trust to recommend the policy?
Not that I'm aware of, I just know that I got from about 15 different clients all of a sudden the same policy saying that the trust, occasionally, whether it's an issue or a federal regulation or a statute comes up, they'll put it through their people and send it out. So I'm not aware of what precipitated it. It could have been a specific instance, I don't know.
Someone else.
That's all you need to know.
It wasn't here.
Not here.
If it was an issue, it wasn't in Bristol Water. That's what I'm getting. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Next, Mr. O'Donnell.
Recommendation S 2018-15, the school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, supported by the policy curriculum subcommittee, approve the first reading of the technology resources responsible use policy GCQBJFB. Okay.
Need a motion to approve? Motion made by Mr. Amos, second by Mr. O'Dell. Any discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of notes that I made as I read through this policy. The first was, I think, relatively simple. For purposes of making it easier to navigate the policy, it would be possible to add page numbers to the second. I didn't see the page numbers. So if they're already there and they were just weren't on the copy that I had, I apologize. The second question that I have, and this might be directed more toward you, Andrew, than anybody else, but I just noticed that in the policy, we have a sentence that reads, copying, modifying, or borrowing copyrighted software is a serious federal offense, which is not permitted. And my suggestion, this is not part of what's currently proposed to modify, but since we're modifying it, that it might make sense to strike the language is a serious federal offense, which on the basis that I don't think that it's our role to be classifying actions as federal crimes in our policies.
Switch that with maybe or could be considered.
Or just strike it entirely.
Can you,
I'll get you there in a second.
can you let us know where you're?
The last bullet.
Adam, can you say what you're proposing again?
Yes,
That I
one
can
second.
get?
Yep. I just gotta get to it. So it's on the second page, and the last bullet, the sub-bullet under appropriately used licensed software. What I would propose is that it be changed to read, copying, modifying, or borrowing copyrighted software is not permitted, and strike a serious federal offense, which I can make it in the form of a motion, or I can just send it as feedback for the, okay, I move that we modify the policy so that the sub-bullet under the last bullet, under ethical conduct, now read, copying, modifying, or borrowing copyrighted software is not permitted.
Second. Motion made and seconded to amend the policy. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it, the policy will be amended to reflect that. Any other questions or comments? No?
I'm gonna pass on the other things and address those separately.
Hearing no other questions or comments, I want to vote on the policy as amended. So all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Next one, Mr. O'Donnell.
Recommendation S2018-16, that the school committee, upon the recommendation of superintendent, supported by the policy curriculum subcommittee, approve the first reading of the naloxone Narcan policy, JFCI.
Second. Motion made by Mr. Engel, second by Mr. Bradshaw. Any discussion?
Yes, I sent an email to Erin, so she's aware of what I'm going to say. It says that it will be available in the middle school and the high school, and I think it should be available in all our schools. We have adults in all our schools, and we also have children who could get their hands on narcotics as elementary school students, and I don't see where it's any more. I think it would be appropriate to have it in all of the schools and not just the middle school and the high school. So I'd like to amend that to read the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school.
So I did talk with Dr. Andrade about your concern. I thought it was a great point, and asked that we look into it with the nurses, get their feedback, so we're going to pass it on.
So I did discuss it with several nurses today. I'm not opposed to it. I think if we have to modify the policy, I think it's well worth it, and then we just have to provide the professional development for those nurses at the elementary schools, and make sure that they have the Narcan in the school. Just funded.
I did think.
So have you got a,
I just have one quick question, super quick, Dr. Andre. Would the supplies, would the same supplies that we carry in the schools apply to that age person? Does it say yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
so I have a motion from Ms. McBride to amend the policy so that it includes our elementary schools. Is that a second to her motion?
Second.
Motion seconded by Mr. Odell. Any discussion on the amendment?
Sure, just a question. I'm not opposed to making sure that we have life-saving support for everybody that needs it. I just want to get some clarity. In your discussion with Dr. Andre with the nurses at the elementary schools, is there discussion around, just because I'm not a medical expert, whether there are potential deleterious effects or whether it is appropriate or safe to use Narcan on elementary age children?
I didn't get into that level of conversation with them, but it's really about, again, the same aspect of providing the professional development, and our policy reflects that we would provide the training to make sure that we can answer those questions. Sorry for the nod.
Just to add real quick, I did, after Mark sent me an email, I did a little research online, and there are several elementary schools across the nation that do have this stocked, so we'll just make sure we get it right and share it all the time.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Just on the amendment. All right. Hearing none, can I have all in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So the policy is amended as presented. Are there any other questions on the policy itself?
Thank you very much. On the second page, B, the little box there, the cross-offs and additions. Would anyone have an explanation as to those cross-offs and additions?
Well, that's the change.
Those are the changes that
Because this was, so this was just an update to this policy, so those are just the changes. We are taking those out of stock and using this other form of administering the drug. It must be more effective.
These recommended changes are coming from the State Department of Health.
Okay, which is where I'm going next, is that these things can change overnight from time to time. I just want, we have other policies in place where we have an auto amend, that if it changes, this auto amends, and the school committee just has notification that this policy is updated because this recommendation has changed. And I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be a bad idea to add an auto amendment clause here. It's as if these change in the future, the policy doesn't have to come back, it auto amends, we get notification that it's changed.
Bill, we can do that by making it an exhibit. So you can say, you can leave B in, and then you can have C Exhibit A, and Exhibit A is what the supplies are, and you can change an exhibit anytime you want without any input from the school committee.
Okay, so we would remove that box, make it an exhibit.
Correct. You could take that.
So I'm going to make a suggestion that we have the chair of the policy subcommittee speak with our attorney and come up with the best process to accomplish what you're talking about, Mr. Odell, and have it for us by the second reading.
I think probably just a footnote right after supplies that says, as may be amended from time to time by the Department of Health.
Between the two of you, you can come up with something so that it's here for the second reading, so we'll be able to approve it. And then if it's not to your satisfaction, then you can amend it at that time. Okay? Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the policy as it was amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it, that policy passes. Next, Mr. Odell.
Okay, recommendation S 2018-17, that the school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, supported by the policy curriculum subcommittee, approve the first reading with reporting known or suspected child abuse and or neglect.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. McBride, second by Mr. Bradshaw. Any discussion? Brian, you have something? No? Question?
You want to talk about the amendment that we made that they don't have? During the policies subcommittee that was held prior to this meeting, there was a change made to step 2, which may not to be 3 protocol under section B, step 2. And the last sentence, which is not going to be in your copy because it was just made, says, instead you are mandated to immediately contact the administrator in the building in which the child in question attends school, at which time the administrator is required to call the police department. So that's not in your packet, but that was just made.
So I'm just going to clarify that real quick. So this policy had that addition